everyone I know has likes and dislikes. We have the things that we prefer, and we have the things we wish we didn't prefer. But I think there's one thing that's common to all of us, that something that we all like to do, and that is eat. We like to eat. In fact, that's even true of the people who are presently dieting. You really like to eat. That's why you are presently dieting. We all like to eat. Have you ever been to one of those all-you-can-eat buffets like the Golden Corral or maybe the Old Country Buffet? That we used to have one in Tucson. I don't think we do anymore. It's gone. It's hard to talk yourself out of not going if you're a guy and getting another piece of steak, just one more. And if you're a lady, just to get one more piece of cake. Yeah, some kind of dessert. Chocolate, right? Whatever it is. We do enjoy savoring the flavors on our palates. Well, Jesus understood the power of food. So let's talk about Jesus, right? We're trying to go about and do good the way he went about doing good. And what did he do? He often used the power of food to minister to people. He's teaching a crowd of 5,000. It's been a long day. In fact, it's been a couple of days he's been teaching them, and he's not willing to send them home hungry. So he asked Philip a question. Philip, where can we get bread that all these may eat? And Philip is breaking out in a cold sweat. He has no idea how he's going to do that, where they're located. Of course, Jesus has already got a plan going in his mind. He knows what he's going to do. He's going to take a little boy's lunch, right? 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he's going to feed a multitude of, 5,000 men with a boy's lunch. And Jesus used the power of food to minister to people. But this isn't the only occasion. You will recall, right, in John's Gospel in chapter number 2, that Jesus has not yet begun his public ministry. He's with his disciples. They've gone to a wedding feast. His mother is in charge of, the catering business, and she's got the food to take care of, and the couple run out of wine. Actually, the bridegroom does. That was his responsibility. And there's no drink for the guests. This is a problem. So Mary, knowing a little bit about Jesus, having grown up in her home, she says, Jesus, could you do something about this problem? And Jesus says, what? My hour is not yet come. This isn't time. It isn't the time for me to be doing this. Nevertheless, he listens to his mother. Good boy. And he tells 6 servants, grab 6 water pots, go fill them with water. He fills them with water. He says, now take and give to the master of the feast, which they do. And he says, you have saved the best wine till now. Jesus used the power of food to minister to people. Now, we don't multiply food the same way Jesus did. And we don't turn water into wine. But we could use the power of food to minister to people around us and to do good. That's the whole message right there. So for those of you who need to write something down and go to sleep, this is the time you can do that. You've got the message. We can use the power of food to minister to people about spiritual truth. So as you go about your life, don't just simply go about. Do some good. Do some good. I almost entitled the message, Go About Eating, but I thought that might communicate the wrong message. So we're going to say dining. And that implies that I'm going to do this with people. So let me give you 3 steps that I see in Jesus' own ministry about how he went about doing good. When it comes to food, I want you to do the same thing, following Jesus' pattern. We're going to go about doing good just like Jesus did. Number 1, set the table. Number 1, let me show you that Jesus set the table, setting the table. You may recall that Jesus often visited a home in Bethany. It's just about 2 miles to the east of Jerusalem. And there he had friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Remember this? And in Luke chapter 10, Jesus is there for a meal. He's sitting down. Here it is on the screen. Now it came to pass, as they went, that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him in her house. And she had a sister called Mary. They're all related. She sat at Jesus' feet, heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving and came to him, Lord, Don't you care? Sorry, that's my interpretation of the passage, right? Don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Bid her, tell her to come, help me. And so Jesus is sitting at the table of Mary and Martha. Martha, of course, has a problem with Mary, who's not helping out. The emphasis of this passage, of course, is upon preferring what Mary was doing because she was sitting at Jesus' feet. Jesus took the opportunity then to instruct Martha about a spiritual matter. There's something more important than physical food. What's that? Spiritual food, spiritual truth. In fact, I have it in my notes here. It's not the food that would be served, but the truth that would be heard that was more important that day. And so it is. If we think like Jesus, our own tables can be a platform for sharing spiritual truth with other people. There is power in food to open closed hearts. Let me tell you a story. I like stories. I know you do too. So I had a professor in college. His name is Greg Mazak. I still think he teaches. And before he was a teacher, he was working his way through school and paying his bills, and he was a motorcycle salesman. Now, forgive me because I don't remember what kind of motorcycle that he sold, but it was motorcycles, all right? And he told the story in class, and so I'm going to repeat it or share with you his story. He was selling motorcycles, and he had this guy came in who was really interested in a motorcycle. And he was really looking it over and asking questions. But just about, after a little while, the guy gets a little bit like cold feet. He starts to back out. He's not interested. And Greg picks up on this. He thinks really quickly. He says, hey, let me go buy you a drink. And so they walked down to the end of the hall, and in the business at that time, they had a vending machine. And it used to be they had vending machines, and you could pop in a couple of quarters, and now it takes your whole wallet to get something out of one of those. But at this time, it's just a couple of quarters. So he pops a couple of quarters, and he gets a couple of drinks. And he starts sharing a Coke with this guy. And they just talk about this and that and family and this. And it was just a variety of things, like you would have a chat with any stranger trying to get to know them better. And at the end of the conversation, as they're getting to the bottom of the Cokes, Greg said, hey, what about that motorcycle? Wouldn't you really like to drive out with that today? And now that his palate was sweetened up a little bit, and his tummy was feeling just a little bit fuller than it was before, he walked back down the hall, signed the papers, and walked out with the motorcycle that day. Now, there's a serious and important point here. Number one, if a salesman offers you a Coke, run the other way. That's the first point. Number two, serious point, right? Food has a way of softening people's resistance and opening up their hearts to tell them something they wouldn't normally want to hear from you. Don't you find it sometimes hard to talk about your faith? Or maybe just feel like the person would be a little put off? But there's something about putting something on the tongue, putting something in the stomach that causes a person's resistance to what you're going to say to kind of fall down or go away. In fact, it should come as no surprise to you if you're a Christian that the New Testament often says that one of the things, the hallmark of Christian testimony, is that we are given to hospitality. Let me have the next screen in verse number 1 Peter 4 and verse 9. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. So I want you to see your table as a platform which God has given you to communicate truth about himself to other people. You can build friendships there and introduce the gospel. Maybe you think that the only way you're going to reach your neighbor is to get him to come to the Christmas program or the Praise and Pies in November, or you're thinking, I got to get him to the next church event because I want to see him saved, or I want to see her saved. And that's good, but you could invite a long time, and some of you have done that, and they have not come to church, and they may never ever do that. But most people will come over if you're serving up your special home-cooked dinner. And all of you have like your favorite recipe, right? Like with Barbara, it was her chicken piccata, right? Or her roast chicken and fried rice, or rice, I think it was. And you all have a dish. And you serve that up, and you invite them in, and you show some hospitality to them, and then you get an opportunity. You know what, you do that? You may not even speak anything about the gospel, but the next time you invite them to church, you know what they're going to think? Oh, that was the person. Yeah, sure. Yeah. They serve me dinner. I'll come to your church. I'll come this week, or I'll come to this special event, or whatever. And you're breaking down barriers because you're using your table as a way to extend the reach of the gospel. I was preparing this message, and I'm thinking, I don't know if people are going to get into this, but if you did, this would really transform this church. The church would probably double in a year if we really embraced this idea of using our table as a platform to introduce people to the church and to God. And listen, not everybody that you invite to your table is going to say yes to Jesus. I get that, but you are breaking down barriers. So many of us live in communities, right? We kind of know our neighbors if we can remember their name, but they come home at night after work at 4:30 or 5:30. The garage goes up, they go in, the garage goes down, and you don't see them until they leave at 7:30 the next morning. This is the reality of the world in which we live, and you're going to have to make effort to get past that garage door and past the front door and have them come to your house or meet them somewhere where you can dine with them and begin to introduce them to your friendliness, to the love of Jesus, and eventually to the gospel that saves their souls. So let your table, or maybe your patio table, become a bridge to show that you care for people and you care about Jesus and sharing him. Several years ago, I read the book, The Turquoise Table. I believe my wife picked it up at the library. It's by Kristen Schell. She advocates for getting a picnic table, painting it turquoise, and setting it in your front yard. I don't know if the Homeowners Association will go for that. But this is her idea, all right? Put it in your front yard, and then just go out there and sit down and watch people who might come by or who would sit down and converse with you. And the whole book is about building connections with your neighbors. Isn't primarily about the gospel. In fact, I don't even know if she's a Christian. Her idea was just use a table as a means to bridge to your neighbors. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to think about your table as a way to bridge to your neighbor. On the fly leaf or on the back of the books, these words are written, desperate for a way to slow down and connect. Kristen Schell put an ordinary picnic table in her front yard, painted it turquoise, and began inviting friends and neighbors to join her. Life changed in her community, and it can change in yours too. Now, I'm not telling you to read a book. I already told you what the book's about, all right? Read the first chapter of that book, and you know what's going on, all right? That's all you need to know. But you don't have to paint a turquoise table and put it in your front yard, but you could use your table to be a bridge to reach your neighbors for Jesus. Long before Kristen marketed her book and suggested a table, guess what Jesus was doing? At the home of Mary and Martha, he was sitting down at a table. Jesus went about doing good, and part of that was dining with people so he could talk to them about what he wanted to. We could do more for Jesus if we did the same thing. Do you like this? I think this has so much potential if we would latch onto it and use our homes as a bridge of hospitality to people who need Jesus. And there are a bunch of people who need Jesus. All right, setting the table. We set the table. What do you do next? Well, with Jesus, you have to sit down with sinners. Number 2, sitting with sinners. Sitting with sinners. He actually sat down with the sinners. Yeah, he ate with his disciples. I've already talked about the fact that he ate with Mary and Martha, and Lazarus were his friends. He sat at the table with them, but he also ministered to people who were on the fringes, the people who were on the outside. And who were those people? Well, the New Testament tells us, Matthew chapter 9. Did you keep your finger there? There's where we are now. And it came to pass, as Jesus sat at meat in the house, Matthew 9:10, if you want it in your text, as Jesus sat at meat, that is, having food in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. So he is sitting in a house. Whose house is it? Well, we know from the other Gospels that he's sitting in the house of Levi, which is another name for Matthew. This is Matthew's Gospel. He's talking about the fact that Jesus came at Matthew's request and had a meal in Matthew's house, to which were invited all these publicans and sinners. Pharisees called him out for it. Look at the next verse in verse 11. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, why eat your master with publicans and sinners? I want to tell you that Jesus didn't shy away from any kind of sinner. He embraced what I'm going to call low-class sinners. Low-class sinners, publicans and sinners. publicans is a New Testament word for a tax collector. Tax collectors are notorious for not only charging what the government wanted, but a surplus that they could keep for themselves. So it was ethical to charge something because they were in the business of collecting taxes, but they often doubled or tripled the amount so that they could live very wealthy while they fleeced the poor for every last dime. Well, that's publicans. What are sinners? These are probably those persons who we would call street people or red light district. These were the people that we tend to avoid, not have contact with. And Jesus sat down with publicans and sinners and had a meal with them. The ones that people thought were too far gone or beyond the reach of grace were the very ones that Jesus spent time with. It suggests something. Shouldn't we make a deliberate effort to go after people that nobody else would invite to sit at our table? Nobody else would invite them. So, hey, is there somebody on your street that everybody tries to avoid that person? Maybe that's the person you ought to have over. Jesus sat with publicans and sinners. Wait a minute, preacher. There's a Bible verse. I know there's a Bible verse somewhere. It says, right, that you're not supposed to sit with sinners. Were you thinking that? Some of you were. Well, you are now if you weren't before. Here's the verse. Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. So am I asking you to do something the Bible tells us not to do? And I would say no. Number one, what? Jesus was doing it himself, and he is our example, and we're supposed to follow. And number two, this verse is actually talking about sitting down and drinking in the poison of scorners who mock God and want nothing to do with it. It's not a prohibition against inviting sinners to sit at your table so you can introduce them to Jesus. It's a prohibition of going and sitting in their house and agreeing to all their ways and doing what they tell you to do and rejecting God. So there's a difference. That verse is not a prohibition against what I'm suggesting to you at this time. We ought to do what we can to reach the lost. But Jesus not only sat with low-class sinners, publicans and sinners, he also sat with what we're going to call high-class sinners. Turn with me, if you can, to Luke's Gospel, chapter number 7. Luke and chapter number 7. You know, in America today, we not only have low-class sinners, but we have high-class sinners. I'm talking about public officials, people who hold office, people in high positions who have degrees and money to back it up, but have no interest in God. And Jesus ate with these kind of sinners too. This is Luke's Gospel, chapter number 7. I'm looking at verse number 36. Verse 36 says, "And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house, and he sat down to meat." So he sat down to eat with a Pharisee. Pharisees were the elite religious group. They weren't only knowledgeable in the scriptures, most of them were also very wealthy. The Sadducees more so than the Pharisees, but this was an elite official. And so while he's eating with the Pharisee, a low-class sinner comes in. Let's read the next verses, verse 37 and 38. "Behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner," prostitute probably, "when she knew that Jesus sat at meat at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. And she stood at his feet behind him, weeping, began to wash his feet with her tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment." So what would Jesus do in the presence of a high-class sinner when a low-class sinner is touching his feet? Well, the high-class Pharisee called him out for it. Again, next verse. Let's go to the next slide, please. Verse 39, "Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who, what man or woman it is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner." Now that woman, providentially set up by God to be in that house, not only to anoint Jesus' feet and show her affection and to receive Jesus' forgiveness, which she did in this text, but also to be an example to the Pharisee, because just like this woman, like this low-class sinner, the high-class sinner in whose house Jesus ate also needed forgiveness. His judgmental attitude needed to be replaced with a need for forgiveness for himself, if he could see it. Let me ask you a question. In the last 12 months, have you had a sinner in your house? Have you had a person who's not a Christian in your house? Have you had a person who doesn't go to church in your house? Can't we use our houses as a place, a bridge, to meet people who need Jesus and to show them love? I think this is exactly what the Scripture is showing us Jesus did. He went about doing good, and part of that was dining with people who were publicans and sinners. And why do we have a hard time with that? Why can't we make time for that? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we need to think about using our table as a platform to show and express the love of Christ to other people. I'm talking about people that you know. Maybe it's your office mate or the fellow you share lunch with in the break room or the neighbor or across the back wall or the person that you go with walks on or the group that you shoot pool with. You already know them by name. If you bring up Jesus, it's not going to be awkward. They already know you know Jesus. That makes you the unique person that you are. So share Jesus. Talk to them. Meet them. Have them in your home because it's naturally a part of what you do. They're going to expect you at some point to bring up the subject. And they're going to actually think your faith is inauthentic if you never bring up Jesus. We need to get busy. We need to set a table and invite some sinners over. There's somebody sitting in the room and you're thinking, but I don't even like to cook. Most of you don't have that problem because I've eaten in most of your homes, and I'm thankful for it. But some of us, but I don't like to cook. Well, this really is about sharing food and sharing Jesus with people. It isn't really about what's put on the table. Let me give you some ideas if you don't like to cook. Number one, invite someone to lunch, out to lunch, or to coffee. You don't have to meet in your home if that's inconvenient or uncomfortable for you. Number two, bring home a Papa Murphy's pizza and bake it. Bring home a pizza. You know, that's really simple. Most people like pepperoni, and those who don't will eat cheese. So buy one of both and invite your neighbors over. I mean, really, let's not make it too complicated. We really could do more to invite people if we get beyond the fact that I don't like to cook. Third, order some Chinese and have somebody over. If you insulate yourself inside your four walls and only meet the people you need, that you know, the people at the church, then you're really going to have a limited impact for Jesus. How are other people going to meet the Savior if all we do is congregate in our church and get in our cars and drive quickly home and hide in our houses? So you could invite them to church, but in many cases, they're not going to come. But almost always, if you invite them to your house, they will come, especially when there's free food involved. I'm from a family of 7. I have a family of 7. Someone offers a meal, I'm there. It will decrease my budget for the month. Most people will come for a meal. And it might take a little bit to get it on the schedule, or it doesn't work this weekend because we're out of town, but most people will come to dinner. And maybe when you show them this kind of kindness, they'll want to return the favor and listen to your invite to church. All right, transition. Final point. You good? Are you ready for the final point already? All right, here we go. We've already set the table. Jesus ministered to people while he was at the table. That's what he did with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Remember that? 2, he sat with sinners. We see that because he invited sinners, publicans, to join him at Matthew's house for a meal, which no doubt at some point he was going to share with them what they needed to hear. And that leads us to the last point, which I've already been suggesting all through the message, but now we're going to come to it directly. Number 3, when it comes to using food, the power of food to reach your neighbors. Number 3, speaking up for Jesus. Speaking up about Jesus. Jesus not only ate with them, but at some point he turned conversations, and he wasn't just eating, he was speaking to them about what they needed to hear. He was introducing spiritual truth. I think the best example of this is another low-class sinner, And this is Zacchaeus, and you'll find him in Luke 19. I haven't asked you to turn there yet, but I'm going to ask you to turn there now. Luke 19. And Jesus, again, is dining. Remember this? It's Zacchaeus, right? We sing it in Sunday school, wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Remember this? And he climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. All right, so let's bring up the slide, please. So Zacchaeus is up in a tree. He wants to see Jesus. He heard he's passing through Jericho, so he's going to be in a tree, and he's waiting for this celebrity to pass through. And as he does, the celebrity makes a way to his tree and stops there and says, hey, you, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm going to go eat at your house today. So Jesus invited him over to the house. Now, that isn't exactly what I'm asking you to do, but that's the story, all right? So Zacchaeus gets down out of the tree, and he goes, and I'm sure he put on a good lunch or supper or dinner, whatever, for Jesus that day. Ate a meal in his house. But it wasn't just about the meal. Jesus wasn't just hungry. He was there for another purpose. And how do I know that? Because of what happens at the end of the story. Let's just skip to that point. Luke 19, verse number 7. Are you there? You are, but I'm not. 17. It's still not the right chapter. 19, verse 7. That's what I want. And when they saw it, still not. What am I doing? Verse 8, thanks. Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, this day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is a son of Abraham. There's a lot more happening in those words than initially. But we don't know exactly what Jesus said, but we hear the end, and we know that something spiritual has happened in Zacchaeus. Why? Because he's going to give half of his goods, right? He's going to restore fourfold to anybody he's ripped off. And Jesus said he's also become a son of Abraham. Well, he's already by lineage a Jew, all right? But he has become a son of Abraham, suggesting that he has embraced Abraham's faith. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him for righteousness. I believe Jesus is hinting here that this man actually became a believer that day because of that meal that was held in his house. Are you seeing it? It's right there in the text. Jesus went about doing good. What did he do? He ate with people. He dined with them, and he brought up Jesus when he was with them. Why? Because he was interested in people embracing the gospel before they passed away. And if you're a caring Christian, you could use your table to bring up Jesus and what he means to you, how he's helped you to change course. And a salvation conversation may actually follow as it did with Zacchaeus. Jesus turned the conversation to spiritual things, and you're going to have to do that at some point. You're going to have to hand a tract or talk about the free gift of salvation or use some opportunity in the conversation to introduce Jesus. I find that we often as Christians, make a bigger deal of this than it needs to be. Most of the time, this naturally, the conversation after it gets to work and family and maybe politics, it comes around eventually to religion. Or they'll ask you a question, what do you do on Sundays? I see you leave at 10 o'clock every Sunday. And it gives you doors open when you set the table for Jesus. Now, I know what you're thinking. Man, that sounds hard. I'm breaking out in a cold sweat just now thinking about it. But it's largely because of our perception of other people. We think they don't want to hear about Jesus, but really, most of the time, it's not true. Most of your neighbors already know that you're a Christian, or at least that you're a church goer, because they see the garage go up, they see you in your church clothes, they see you get in the car, they see you leave every Sunday morning, they know what you're doing. So this gives you a platform, an opportunity to talk. You're really not being authentic as a Christian if you don't bring up your faith. That doesn't necessarily mean the first time you meet them, you got to bring up Jesus. I'm not saying that. But you could use food to build a bridge that will give you the opportunity eventually to do that. Sharing Jesus really comes down to who you love the most. Sharing Jesus really comes down to who you love the most. Do you love yourself, or do you love the Jesus who asked you to share him with other people? Let me share some ways or segues that you could go about sharing Jesus at the table in a conversation with a neighbor or coworker or whoever you might invite. Number one, just mention your church. Hey, my wife and I go down to that Three Crosses church that just got built there on Cortero near Hartman. It's just it's not even a half a mile from Walmart. And, we really like that church. But it's not really just the building. Really what we like about it is they talk about Jesus down there. And Jesus made a huge difference in our life. In fact, we both, years ago, gave our lives to Jesus so that we could be forgiven and go to heaven. Has anybody ever talked to you about that? That's a great lead-in. Has anybody ever talked to you about that? And you know what happens? They'll say, no, but I've been interested. Or no, I wish somebody would. Or they'll say, no, and I'm really not interested, but thanks for dinner, and we'll see you next time. And they'll walk out. And that's okay. It's okay for people to say no to Jesus. You brought the subject up. You obeyed God because we're supposed to preach, Mark chapter 16, verse 15, go and preach the gospel to every creature. Bring up Jesus and let them decide whether they're going to engage the conversation. If they choose not to, well, you say, thanks so much. I hope we get to do this again sometime. And then it ends. Number two, here's another thing. Just share your testimony. At some point, they're going to ask you, well, where are you from? How'd you end up in Tucson? Well, that's a great leading question. Anybody can get to the gospel from that question because you could just say, when I was a teenager, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. I'm making this up, all right? I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and I went to this little church down the street that my mom took me to, and they had this summer camp. And every year, I'd get on this bus, and we'd ride 400 miles away over, to Arkansas, and we'd have camp. And they'd have these preachers, and they'd talk about Jesus, and I understood one of those years that I was a sinner, that I had broken God's laws, and who can deny that? We all break the Ten Commandments. And I asked Jesus into my heart that summer. I asked him to forgive me for all the things that I've done wrong, and asked him to take me to heaven when I die. And since then, I've had absolute peace with God. It's a wonderful thing. Has that happened for you? You tell your story, then you follow up with a question. Has that ever happened for you? Why? That way you're turning it back to them, and you're giving them an opportunity to dialogue. And they could say, no, I don't think it ever has, but could you tell me more what it means? Or, no, but I'll give it some thought. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time. And they're out the door. That's okay. You just ask a question. You share your testimony, ask a question. Here's a third approach that you could use. If you had people at your table, you've had a nice meal, you've served them dessert, you've done your very best to make it a pleasant evening. Before they go, they're starting to get up. We need to go get the kids down or whatever. And so they start making their way to the door. And you, being a good Christian, always have tracts really close by at the door or somewhere where you could, and you pull out, hey, here's a little message from our church. It's about Jesus and how you can have peace with God and know for sure you have eternal life. And you hand them a tract. And you know what? That again is a conversation. They'll either engage you and say, oh, what's this about? Could you tell me? Or they'll just say, well, thanks very much. I'll look at it later, or thank you, goodbye. That also opens the door. Those are three different approaches. They're pretty gentle, and nobody's really going to be, they're going to actually be a little bit surprised if you don't bring that up. If you're a Christian, that's what you ought to do. Now, aren't you excited? You got a whole game plan here. This could really work. This could dynamically change your life. You could become the Lord's ambassador, Jesus, sitting at table. Jesus did sit at the table with sinners, but now you're his representative. You're sitting at a table, and you're inviting sinners into the fellowship so that they can learn about your Jesus too. Just imagine what might happen. So I'd like to challenge you to do something about this. We hear things sometimes and we think, oh boy, that was a good lesson. I really appreciate the preacher. He must have spent a lot of time putting that together. And I did spend a lot of time putting this together. But that ain't the point. James says, right, in James chapter 2, right? But be ye doers of the word and not hearers only. What's that, James 1:22, I think? All right, so here's the challenge. What if you, in the next 30 days, that's 4 weekends from now, all right, thought about one person or a family that you could invite into your home? Or if you don't like to cook, take them out for a Starbucks, or invite them down to Chili's or Cracker Barrel or one of your favorite places and have lunch with them and say, hey, I've been meaning to get to know you better. We live on the same street, or we're part of the same club, or we do yoga together, whatever it is. Let's have lunch. Let's meet together. And while you're there, you mention your church, you share your testimony, or you hand them a tract. Could you do that in the next 30 days? You could, if you wanted, do good, go about this month, this next 30 days, and dine with somebody on purpose. Would you do that? Now, I thought about upping the ante a little bit and handing out Visa gift cards to everybody who did that. And if you think that's a great idea, share it with me after the service. But I didn't want to buy your loyalty to Jesus. I just wanted you to be a Jesus person yourself. I just wanted you to do it because you love Jesus. I just want you to do it because you love Jesus more than you love yourself. And because, folks, people are dying around us without Jesus. And it's not okay just for you to be okay and for your family to be okay and for all of the people you know to go to heaven. We are his ambassadors, and we need to be sharing Jesus regularly. Now, this isn't something you can necessarily do every week, but could you put it in your schedule for once a month? Or maybe once every two? If you did it every 2 months, had a neighbor, you'd have most of your neighbors done in a year, your immediate neighbors, all done in a year. And you may or may not have gospel conversations, but you can try to speak up about Jesus. You could do this if you love Jesus. And I think the impact would be monumental, both on your life and the life of this church, if we considered using our table as a platform for ministry. All right? Don't make ministry complicated. All you have to do is sit down and have something to eat. That's the message today. Open your hearts and your doors. Set your table for Jesus. Can I tell you another story? I like stories. Do you like stories? I hope you do. B.F. Mills, I don't know this man, preacher from yesteryear. I'm certain it happened probably around the middle of the 20th century, maybe a little bit before. So the story is dated, but it works. Listen to this. I remember going downstairs in a hotel. This is the preacher speaking. It's about midnight, with some letters in my hand that I wanted to put in the post or to mail. And the attendant was not at the hotel desk, but a policeman was standing there instead. And I said, is there a way for me to post these letters? He said, let me take them. I'll put them in the mail for you. And so I thanked him, handed him the letters, and then started back upstairs to my room. And that's when I heard a little voice say, why did you not speak to that policeman about Christ? Ooh. And I said, it's because it wouldn't do any good. And so he kept on walking up the stairs. The voice came again, how do you know? I kept going up the whole time. Why did you not speak to him about his soul? I said, Lord, it didn't even look like that guy had a soul. He was a very fleshly looking sort of man. The voice said again, are you going to preach to others and then be a castaway yourself? I said, no, Lord, I will go back. And the preacher turned around and he walked down the stairs back to the hotel desk. Just before he got there, he heard a door close, and by the time he got to the desk, the hotel attendant was there, but the policeman was gone. So I said, if I see that man again, I will preach Christ to him, if it's a possible thing. And so the man went on to have his meetings. He was a preacher. He was in town to preach. He preached the next afternoon at a service. And wouldn't you know it, that policeman came in and sat down in the back of the service where the preacher was. And I thought as soon as I got done preaching, I had to go back and find that guy and talk to him because I had promised the Lord. But when the service was over, the aisles all filled, and I could not get around the people. You've done this, right? You want to get out. and you can't. So he couldn't get out. So he finished up some conversations. The crowd started to weed out a little bit. And down the aisle came the policeman directly to the preacher. The tears were streaming down his cheeks, and he said to me, I have never known what it meant to be a Christian. But if you will tell me, I will start right now. The story ends with the preacher's words, oh, I believe that all about us, touching our elbows today, waiting in the store and in the street, looking into our faces across the table, are people who are waiting for the touch of a living, earnest Christian in order to be led into the kingdom of God. So are you just going to keep eating? Or are you going to go about dining with Jesus? Shall we pause for prayer?